Good morning. Innovation in challenging times. Nothing could be worse right now than for people to say that they're too busy dealing with, shall we say, basic survival to worry about fancy things like innovation. This is a time for recognizing one's advantage in the innovation area, to accelerate, not to delay transformation. A colleague recently said, look, just understand that 2025 got here 60 months early, and to really seize the opportunity, not merely to power through this on one's own, but to establish in the process leadership of an ecosystem. Next slide, please. It's important to be thinking about this as an opportunity to take new territory, which one cannot do from, as it were, hunkering down in a foxhole. Surviving the moment is necessary, but it's not sufficient. It will not take you into even as early as September of this year in the position you need to be in. And I think it's useful to point out that in the past, those who seized moments of crisis to create new customers, in the phrase of Peter Drucker, have been well rewarded. Procter & Gamble, the consumer products brand, created the soap opera format originally as radio entertainment in 1933. And stockholders would say, why are you spending this money on marketing when no one is buying? And fortunately, the leadership had the spine to say, watch and learn. And they created brand recognition and share that powered them through the decades to come. More recently, in 2008, John Chambers at Cisco talked about their aggressive and vigorous moves into adjacent and new markets, and to build share of wallet that then became persistent, durable leadership when conditions improved. And to see the opportunity in areas like the future of work, distributed ledgers, which are going to have such a powerful role, blockchain type technology, in creating ecosystems that can function with precision at scale. Various areas of AI, a label I generally avoid because machine learning is one kind of thing and prediction and analysis is another. And health and education clearly are going to be transformed by the experience we're going through. The question I'm asking is, when your entire industry now has a free pass not to be burdened by legacy practices, many of which people have chafed at for years, now you have the opportunity not to be the only one not doing the regular things, not showing up at the big trade show and so on, and to say, well, now that we've got this year to experiment, when everyone else is also forced to take a departure from familiar practices, how can we maximize that value? Next slide, please. Bill Ford of Ford Motor was on the American program 60 Minutes just last night, 2 nights ago, talking about the dramatic pivot that they were able to do to start producing ventilators for medical applications in just a matter of weeks. And he said something I thought was really quite salient here. There are companies that can make complicated things in small volume and simple things in large volume. The number of companies in the world that can make a complicated object at mass volume is relatively small. And if you think of that as the distinctive competency of an automobile company, rather than making automobiles as such, you realize that looking at yourself and saying, well, what are our really distinctive competencies? What you've been doing with those competencies is one thing, but what you could be doing when you really recognize what unique combinations of skills and perspectives you have is an area that I think opens up a lot of opportunity for improvement. Next, please. One of the critical things to observe is that what's different now is that we have a global ecosystem of cloud services that can dramatically accelerate your ideas. 10 years ago, I had my first opportunity to work with Bank Inter at their Future Trends Forum gathering in Madrid to talk about cloud, which at the time was a relatively novel thing. And I shared some statistics that have been produced by outside observers on the dramatic acceleration in the development and deployment of new solutions. The cloud should not be seen as merely cost reduction through centralization and scale, but really had the opportunity by creating platform services in areas like, say, security, to dramatically accelerate innovation. Well, fast forward to this year, when a team, including one of my own people, built in 4 days and was able to deploy globally an application that is now available globally to track and assign a scarce resource, namely those ventilators that Bill Ford was talking about being able to pivot forward to start manufacturing. And I think it's so necessary to realize we've got this amazing lubricant, as it were, for the gears of progress, which is the availability of these scalable, reliable cloud services and a population that knows how to use them. Because remember, back in 2010, 2008, Facebook had maybe 1/6 of its first billion users and now has more like 3 billion users. So we're looking at something on the order of a 20-fold growth of the community that's ready to use, ready to engage with cloud services wrapped around what we used to call products. Next, please. Mike Vandervelde at Boeing said something really important quite recently, that this is about companies being able to solve problems at global scale with larger, more diverse teams to build adaptive systems that are resilient for changing conditions. This is very different from the last few decades' emphasis on relentless optimization. So I want to drill into that idea for just a moment. Next, please. At Schneider Electric, they discovered that their global operations were fragmented across, in their own estimate, maybe 100 different systems to deal with different splinters, shards, and fragments of customer identity and process. By bringing those all together and taking full advantage of cloud collaboration, they now have 43,000 users plus another 100,000 partners who really are able to exchange insights and to spark ideas among each other. And a company that is still allowing itself to be siloed and fragmented within its own boundaries and not take full advantage of the synergy of its partner ecosystems, I think is at a severe disadvantage today. Next, please. It is crucial to realize that optimizing yourself for this world is not enough. If you are a perfect jewel of digital transformation, but you are interacting with customers who expect a canceled paper check as their receipt for payment, or a field service situation in which a rubber stamp on a drawing that provides boxes for people to initial for permission to begin with a field service operation is just not going to work. You need, oddly enough, to think about investing beyond your own borders, investing time and maybe even other resources in the process of bringing with you your customers, crucially, your supply chain and your other partners into the world in which you can be as effective as you would like. One of the things that is being recognized now is that even companies that thought they had a high level of pandemic preparedness are discovering that if their supply chain does not survive, then their own survival is kind of moot. And so they are having to think of the supply chain now as going in both directions, not just a waterfall of raw materials coming down to them for value add, but really a set of obligations that goes both ways, where you need to keep your supplier with you to take full advantage of the return to anything resembling global economic activity. Next, please. I'm going to take a brief digression on the word exponential because it's so often used merely to say, wow, that's really fast. People say we're seeing exponential growth of something, and I don't really know if they've drawn the curve. We tend to think that things will behave like the S-curve on the left, that there will be a period of intense change, and then we will digest that and accommodate that and be able to think about a requirements gathering process for the next surge. Our own partners at Salesforce tell me so often that their challenge is to get their customers not to think of transformation as a project that has an end state, but that the product of transformation is a continuously transforming company or culture. Now, if you move to the middle graph and say, okay, fine, I get it, there's going to be continuous change. Well, I've drawn that as a graph with linear change. And then just to contrast that on the right, you see an actual exponential curve. The problem is if you are at the point where those three curves on the right are diverging and you are trying to secure budget for the red curve, for the actual exponential growth curve, it's going to be a challenge. People have just spent a bunch of money getting you there on the blue curve and they think, okay, now we're going to get some ROI on this. Or they're saying, okay, we've geared up, we can handle the pace of change of the green curve. And you can have that again next year because we're about aggressive improvement. And that's not nearly aggressive enough. And you might think that exponential curves are a Silicon Valley fantasy, but if I were to plot number of people staying at an Airbnb, maybe not right now, but over the last few years, or the number of people riding on Uber, again, not at this precise moment, but other parameters, including things like the amount of memory in your phone. Many phenomena around us do in fact demonstrate this hockey stick continuous acceleration. It's the nature of acceleration that you never get to coast. You are always under power. There is always a disturbing force being applied to yourself and to the system around you. Now, the application of disturbance to the system around you can be a challenge. Next, please. When the disturbance moves more quickly than the environment around it can adapt, you get in the air a sonic boom, you get a shock wave effect. And if you're out at the pointy end of that cone of shock, you are the disruptor, and that's an interesting and exciting place to be. If you're down there at the bottom right inside that yellow curve, then your windows have just broken before you heard the approaching plane. Not a good thing. Most organizations are somewhere out in that flat space ahead of the yellow curve. They have a vague sense that there's impending disruption, and they're looking in every direction, wondering where it's going to be. If you've ever been at an air show when a supersonic aircraft has flown by, you know, you literally hear absolutely nothing until after the plane has passed and the sound hits the ground, but the plane is long gone. And I think this is an important way of thinking about the challenges for management and for organizations now. Next, please. Because it used to be that we would say, oh, you've got to listen. Listen to your customer, listen to your competitors, listen to your marketplace. And now, of course, listening does not give you a warning of what's coming. If you are fortunate, it may give you an explanation of what just happened. But I think we're clearly in an environment today where that's not even going to be an adequate excuse. You have to be using, if I may extend the metaphor, over the horizon radar. You need to be looking at underlying root causes like demographic change, at underlying circumstances like geopolitical necessity. It is simply not enough to do conventional market research, focus groups. All of these things are like trying to listen for an oncoming supersonic aircraft. It simply won't tell you what's going to happen until after, in fact, it already has happened. Next, please. What you're seeing at the top right there is the door hinge of a Jeep Wrangler. It's a very simple example of something I'd like to share with you now, which is that box there indicates, it may not be coming through well in your image, but the term T-50 is engraved on that hinge. T50 is the size of the standard Torx wrench that will be used if you ever want to take that door off of the vehicle. And it is a modular design. It would have been cheaper to use welding or rivets or some other technology to make the car more monolithically built. And building in the additional hardware and the additional strength and reinforcement to make that door removable has a cost. They did not use their own proprietary fastener or tool. They used a standard Torx wrench that you can purchase anywhere. It's standard interfaces, and it is designed for the day when change will be required. It is so common now for systems to be relentlessly optimized for the concept at hand, for the situation in which they're being deployed. And it is not always popular to say, well, we need to build in slack. If anything, people have been trained for the last few decades relentlessly to remove slack from systems. Building it in on purpose to create the resilience for change, to reflect the anticipation of the necessity of change is, I think, probably one of the most interesting changes in perspective that is likely to emerge from what we're seeing today. Next, please. And what this does is change the definition of excellence. It's remarkable that I can take a 33-year-old book, namely Tom Peters' Thriving on Chaos, and share it and have people's eyes light up as if they're hearing something quite new. But in his preface to that book, he pointed out that the title is Thriving on Chaos, not thriving in spite of chaos, not thriving in defense against chaos, but recognizing that rapid, turbulent, frequently unpredicted, I'm not going to say unpredictable, but unpredicted change is in fact the new excellence, that adaptability is the new excellence. And so the old organization wanted to be responsive, tighten the break fix loop. And a lot of technology has been developed to improve that and to make the organization, I'll say, responsive. That's really not enough anymore. A lot of what's being done now with various subspecies of AI in predictive analytics and diagnostics and so on is to make the organization more intelligent. But the example I often use is that if you walk up to a roulette wheel and place equal bets on red and black, those each pay off at 1-to-1. And almost every time the wheel spins, one of those will lose, but the other will win. You'll break even overall, redistribute your stake. You've hedged your risk, as someone would say. The problem is that in a European casino, there's a 0 on the wheel. In a US casino, it would be a 0 and a double 0, which means that in Europe, with that 1-0 on the wheel, if you spin that wheel about 24 times, it's a coin flip chance that you'll be completely wiped out by that green slot on the wheel. And if you didn't keep that extra $100 or 100 euros in your side pocket, you are out of the game and you cannot get back in. Deliberately keeping resources available to handle the infrequent but plausible scenario, and this is called scenario planning, is a tremendously important discipline that's really not what's being taught in most of the MBA programs today. But the idea of being resilient in the face of constant improvement and able to execute constant change really is a definition today of organizational competency. And being an innovator is not a mark of differentiation anymore. It's table stakes. Next, please. I've talked about exponential curves, and the world is changing exponentially in so many ways that give all of us responsibilities that, as I've already indicated, extend well beyond our own borders and our own self-interests. We need to think about the pipeline for our talent beginning now at perhaps age 10 and not at university graduation time. We need to be thinking about our investments in education extending all the way back into early childhood. We need to look at pay equality just as a matter of economic self-interest, because the absence of that is limiting our access to the talent we need to make our organizations diverse, and through diversity, more capable of understanding a broad range of possible events. We need to look at the nature of global stewardship, and at Salesforce we concentrate a lot on the Sustainable Development Goals, on being carbon neutral, on taking advantage of new opportunities, as we are right now. I hate to think what the carbon footprint would be if I were to get the 300 of us who are currently involved in this conversation all together in one place. We used to do that all the time. I think we're going to accelerate our exploration and our acceptance of the idea that perhaps we can get more done and not merely apologize for getting almost as much done, but actually improve what we're able to accomplish in the planet by taking more advantage of the technologies that we're using right now. Next, please. And so these shockwaves that can be so destructive if we do not anticipate them, and that can take us so much by surprise, if we do anticipate them, if we have certain expectations of how they'll behave and can make provision for that, we can actually surf on their energy. We can, as Tom Peters says, thrive on the chaos. We can take our example from companies like Procter & Gamble and Cisco and Schneider and many others who have shown that by engaging with and mastering this complexity, it becomes an opportunity to understand our customers' needs even before our customers could articulate them themselves. And I think that that's why this is such a great time to be having this conversation about the nature of innovation in these times. And I thank Bank Inter for getting us together to do that.